So Cynthia and I really wanted to bring you a diversity of perspectives today so that each person would be talking from a different standpoint. And you've heard a number of talks from the public and private sector, from nonprofits to for-profits, but what you haven't heard yet from is the entertainment industry. And I'd like to introduce Elisabeth Ness, who is a socially conscious creative who is making a positive impact in the world through stage, on-screen, and online entertainment. She's a producer, an actress, a writer, and she is the co-founder of Good Porpoise Productions, which makes impactful media, including mini-documentaries for nonprofits and award-winning hit series called Redheads Anonymous. I think you'll really enjoy her talk today.
Thank you for that intro. So I'm the caboose here, and I wanted to just quickly give a sense of what we've learned, or at least what I'm taking away from these incredible speakers that came before me. We've learned that partisanship is a strong drug. We've learned that it's hard to inspire action on an item when people are already under the impression that that item is already the status quo. We've learned how to frame the abortion debate. It's sort of, there you are. It's sort of, do you believe in access to health care rather than do you think abortion should be legal? You should speak up against ignorance around the dinner table and through press, money, and votes. How something is framed before you take a test has an effect on how you do on the test. And companies that have diversity and a diversity of perspectives outperform the others. So with that in mind, do me a favor. Don't think of an elephant. I bet you all just thought of an elephant. You rebels. According to George Lakoff, who wrote the aptly titled book, Don't Think of an Elephant, you're simply following the brain's need to process information through a frame. I gave you a framework, even though I tried to negate it by telling you not to follow it. And once you've formed a viewpoint through which to view the world, it can be very hard to change it. People who understand this are able to choose words that trigger stories and frameworks in your mind, whether conscious or not. This is how the term anti-abortion became pro-life. Who isn't in favor of life? And the positive, admirable environmental protections became the more onerous regulations. In a basic sense, whoever controls the language controls the frame through which you view the issue, and therefore wins the war of public opinion. And since a certain someone is incredibly adept at gaining free airtime, he is also very good at controlling the narrative. Even when we use his words against him, they're still his words. It's still his frame. But it goes even deeper than that, in a way that profoundly affects how we're going to need to approach the next 4 years. So please, come on a journey with me. This is a true story. I'm in high school, spending 3 weeks at a writer's workshop outside of Chicago. My fellow students and I have come from all over the country, from all kinds of backgrounds. Several members of the group are openly gay, and several more are convinced that homosexuality is a sinful abomination. To take a break from writing, our group is scheduled to see the popular Chicago performance troupe, the Neo-Futurists, performing a show called Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind. Sounds intriguing and possibly harmful to infants. As we take our seats, we're told that it's Gay Pride Week, and tonight's 30 stories will all be about LGBTQ issues. It's a sore spot for our group. I can feel the tensions rise around me, and I grip my chair as I wait for some of our fellow participants to get upset and storm out. The performers tell these 30 stories with absolute honesty and heartbreaking empathy for their subject matter. We learn about what it's like to love someone and not be able to tell them for fear that they'd shun us. We learn about what it's like to deal with parents who have a vision in mind for their child's wedding and what their grandchildren will be like, and to know that we will never be able to live up to those hopes. We learn about what it's like to lose a loved one to suicide, or a best friend to bullying, or a parent to a scary autoimmune disease caused by a virus. We learn and we connect and we feel, because everything they are talking about is, at its core, a universal human experience. At the end, we wipe away our tears and hug each other, particularly those in our group whom we've come to understand in a new light. While in the midst of such a hug, I turn and I see one of the most conservative workshop participants, someone who had offhandedly spouted bigoted vitriol only hours earlier as we walked through the city. He walks right up to the gay student I was hugging. Very important to know. I tense and I ready myself for confrontation. But instead, he quietly says to him, "I have shown insensitivity and disrespect as a result of ignorant beliefs. I am sorry." How did this moment, this life-altering discarding of deeply learned hatred, how did this manage to happen? Well, first, to change the framework through which one views the world, one person has to be willing to speak authentically and personally to the other, in a way that respects that person's intelligence and humanity. The other person, in turn, has to be open, respectful, and willing to listen. Both things happened here to the credit of all involved. Second, the neo-futurist performance stirred up thoughts and feelings that occur universally, connecting the audience to the characters. It replaced the student's old framework, a rigid religious morality of unyielding right and wrong imposed on all of those around him, as well as people he didn't even know, with a new framework that allowed him to relate the experiences of his gay peers to his own experiences as a full-blooded human being. He could imagine himself in another person's shoes. The stories gave him empathy. Empathic storytelling is crucial because with it, we can receive glimpses into other people's experiences that we will never get ourselves. That personalization changes our entire worldview. It changes our framework. How many of you have seen that YouTube video where the girl walks through the streets of New York City in a totally unremarkable outfit and then gets catcalled for 10 hours straight? Yeah, all right. A male friend watched it, and he turned to me and he asked, eyes wide, "Is that really what it's like?" And that, in turn, raised my awareness that his experience in the streets of New York was completely different than mine. How could he know? He couldn't, right? But now, because of one video, he could have an idea. And that, to me, is a victory that gives me hope. We're at an incredible point in the world's history. We've got virtual reality that allows us to actually walk through the refugee camps as though we're there. And never before have we been able to tell stories that can reach so many millions of people so quickly and so easily. The barrier to entry for mass influence has never been lower. In fact, as was mentioned, I jumped this hurdle very recently. Along with a fantastic team, I made a web series called Redheads Anonymous. Believe it or not, it's a comedy. The show takes a group that is culturally acceptable to make jokes about, redheads, and uses it as a humor-veiled allegory for a host of social cultural issues such as stereotyping, tokenism, and bigotry. It relies on universal experiences, like being ashamed of a trait that makes you different or wanting to belong, to make it relatable to non-redheads as well. If you're curious, you can check it out on YouTube, regardless of your hair color. The point is, we got incredible emotional responses from viewers. One woman emailed to say that she had always dyed her hair because she'd been ashamed of it. But after watching the show, she reached a peace and even a pride about her body and would finally return her hair to its original state. Others reached out to thank us for cheering up their kids who were dealing with bullying, or for helping them see their own stories reflected back to them so they would know they're not alone in their experiences. All of a sudden, what viewers had perceived as being an out group had become an in group. That community created through storytelling is powerful. It can change how people view themselves and each other. And since we're biologically wired to treat outgroups, the other, as threats or not being worthy of resources, whereas we care about and want to protect our in-groups, any chance we can take to turn an out-group into an in-group will make a huge difference in all of our lives, not to mention our elections. If I can tell a story that elicits such viewer responses, so can you. I want to empower you to tell your story, or to tell the story of those who can't speak up for themselves. Because that's how we can come to understand each other and then craft policies and advocate for positions with real people in mind, instead of the caricatured figures that came to populate voters' frames during this election cycle. Over the course of the next 4 years, we're going to need a lot more empathy-inducing storytelling, whether on stage, screen, song, or social media, to empower us and show us how to step outside our worldview and into others' shoes. And I have hope, because socially conscious content creators are banding together to make that content all over the world and under the umbrella of my company, Good Porpoise Productions. As important as this empathy is, and you know it's important because Meryl Streep told you so, shouting empathy isn't exactly a rousing rallying cry. And that's where it gets a little complicated, because while empathy is awesome and admirable, so is anger. And I've studied the science of emotions, and boy, I can tell you, anger is an incredibly potent inspiration and energizer for taking action. That fact gives me hope right now, because as we've heard today, we're sad, we're scared, and we're angry. I'm also hopeful because millennials have learned a lot about our government and our political machine over the past year, with more personal and memorable lessons than those we studied in civics class. Had our candidate won, I'm not sure we would have been quite as awakened or action-oriented as we are now. You know that part of the movie where the hero's mentors have died or been silenced or vanquished by evil, and there's a leadership vacuum with no one left to guide, and the hero's at the lowest point, leaving them with the choice to either give up or take a deep breath and strive forward alone? We're the hero, and we're at that moment in the story. But the difference is we're not alone. We're together. And with the majority of voters, in fact. That majority will need to reinforce our framework and our worldview every time a certain person with narcissistic personality disorder starts to gaslight the press, which is really just a fancy way of saying changing the frame and then telling you that you were crazy for viewing things through your previous frame. And every time he tries to normalize previously unthinkable behavior and attitudes. Speaking of which, I trumpeted the benefits of anger, but now I offer a word of caution, because our anger can spray wildly and become friendly fire instead of being directed at the right target, and our new president knows that. He enjoys sowing seeds of discord. He does it so that he can maintain control. As long as everyone under him is bickering, and all of his enemies are bickering, he can maintain a strong hand and be the one stable, powerful figure that everyone can look to. If he is able to craft the narrative for the next 4 years and sow seeds of discord amongst us, his opposition, America will reward him with another 4. And if we can't build consensus about the fairness of non-gerrymandered redistricting in 2020, America could end up rewarding him with more. We can't let this happen. But if we can't agree on a set of facts, if we drum ourselves up into a frenzy over a fake news article to the point where we're blind with rage and deaf to our fellow citizens, we're going to put a gulf between our framework and theirs, to the point where we no longer recognize similar values or retain the ability to use our democratic republic for its stated goal. Plus, if no one can agree on what a fact is, then no one can advocate for policy more successfully than the person who already has the bully pulpit. And we can't build effective opposition. Our democracy can be torn apart by a growing gulf of frameworks, where we're experiencing distinctly different realities thanks to selective, if you liked that, you'll like this algorithms that keep us humming along in our own worlds, missing opportunities to expand and to understand. Which brings me back to empathy. Because although it can be frustrating and difficult to remember, the bulk of America wants the end results that we want. Good jobs, education, opportunity, food, and safety for themselves and their families. It's just a question of how we're going to get there and what kind of world we create while we're on that journey. Okay, last story. A girl comes upon a huge beach that is covered with starfish that have been stranded by the receding tide. One by one, she picks up the starfish and tosses them back into the sea. Her friend asks, "Why are you even bothering? There's no way you'll be able to save all the starfish on this beach." The girl responds as she picks up another starfish, "I might not be able to save them all, but I sure as heck made a difference in the life of that one." If you inject your conversations and your stories with empathy and empower others to do the same, you will undoubtedly change the lives of some starfish and people. And if you channel your anger to change the framework through which people view the causes and values that are important to our nation, so that coalitions can be built around universal experiences, you'll transform the whole beach. And when our new president changes the framework to justify actions that contradict the values of empathy and compassion that you hold dear, and tells you to think of an elephant, fine, go ahead and think of that elephant, but then go ahead and help a starfish. We're all in this together, so we better get down to work. Thank you.